Okay, there's one more thing that you can do, and that is if you want to detail these inside ZBrush and give the displacement map without any problem and a bit faster, you can select them and join them together, because if you bring this into ZBrush and start to apply the detail map, you need to apply individually, but we are now connecting them to each other and then apply the detail map inside ZBrush and then detach them there in ZBrush. So again, this one and detach, attach these ones as well, and this one as the last one. Select one object as the last and Control J. And now we have these, and let's do something for this as well. But I feel like overall we do not need so much detail on these, because the UVing process is going to take a little bit of time, and these are not something that the player is going to be seeing. So I'm going to delete these and create some ones that are a bit simpler to work with. So for example, something like this. And we really do not need these parts because they are not going to be seen anyway. So why putting so much time and effort on sculpting these? So let me see if yeah, this one is better. And now I can safely come in here and select, let me zoom out and go into solid view and select this, and I start to increase the selection. Looks like it's not. So let's take this and I start to increase the selection by hitting Control and plus. And when we got there, I simply, let's deselect these ones that belong to the top portion, and delete these. And now let's take this edge and extrude it down just a bit, so that it's something like a spike instead of being bolt or something like that. And let's select the bolt and resize it down. Okay, this will do. And now I'm gonna fill the gap in here by right clicking, selecting the edges, right click and hit N, and it will create a new face for you there. And then shade smooth, and then in shading pie set it to 30 degrees. And looks like it's a little bit too big. And let's drag this out in here and bring some copies in case we wanted to create some variations. Okay, and now let's join these as well and call this bolt or a spike or anything that you want. So now select all of them and then export them as FBX into ZBrush. So here we are in ZBrush, and let's go to import and bring the FBX that we created before. We don't need to change anything, and then it imported without any problem. So now we are ready to do the sculpting, and let's see where we are going to start first. I'm first going to start with this plank kit and delete these as well. So let's hit F to frame on these, so that when I try to rotate, I'm only rotating on these ones and bypassing those ones. And also remember to save often, because there are times when ZBrush crashes and you might lose a little bit of progress. I always tend to create some copies from my projects and creating, for example, 3 projects from the same one, and start to saving incrementally on those so that I have something to go back to. So now we have this amount of polygon, and it's good but not really that much. So we are going to hit a smooth instead of dynamesh, because if we hit dynamesh it's going to ruin the UVs. And let's try to see what it does. If we try to dynamesh these, it's going to ruin. You see it has ruined the geometry, and the UV is going to be ruined as well. And if you go to UV master and hit flatten in here, it says that no UVs. But let's go a step back before dynamesh, and this is before dynamesh. And now let's hit flatten, and now it's going to show the UVs that we created inside Blender, and the UVs are perfectly there without any problem. So let's hit unflatten, and now we're gonna smooth these. And if we try to hit Control and D, it starts to smooth these out. But I'm not going to smooth them. I'm not going to use Dynamesh. I'm going to use the regular smooth, which is available in here in the geometry tab, and it's this divide. I have dragged this into the viewport, and the shortcut for that is Control and D. And if I try to go a step back, there's this smoothing problem. And now if I hit the smooth, it isn't going to smooth the edges. It's only going to add to the geometry. But if you want to have a little bit of a smoothing, you can go a step back and apply this as smooth, and then hit Control and D, or this divide. And now it has smoothed the edges for us a bit. And because this is going to be a wood, and we are going to sculpt a lot of edges in here, there's not a problem if we try to add the edges to be smooth a little bit in the beginning. So now we have this amount of polygon, 5 million polygons, and we are ready to start displacing these with the tiling map. And first we need to create a tiling map for these. And I'm gonna create that tiling map in Photoshop and based on the real photo, so that we have a strong base to start with. And I'm going to use these real photos to generate some height maps and tile them and apply them to the planks that we have there. And these will make perfect tiling maps so that we can use them without any problem on our meshes. So this is one of the images. I opened this into Photoshop, and one thing that we can do is making this a square. So let's bring the crop, and first let's see what the resolution of this is. Go to image and image size, and you see the resolution is quite much. I'm going to make it 4K by 4K, and that is not a problem really, because the resolution supports that. So on the ratio in here, I'm going to manually type 4 by 496, 4096, and hit OK. Or first you can decide to select a particular part of your mesh. So I'm going to select this part and hit OK. And now we have the cropped image, and the size is now 4K. Okay. And we're going to create a grayscale map out of this, which we can use to detail out our maps in ZBrush. So let's first hit Control and U, and then close the saturation all the way to -100. And now we have a basic grayscale map. And if we start to apply this as a displacement map into ZBrush, the black parts are going in and the white parts are going out. And the parts that are 0.5 gray, they are going to stay untouched. And everything beyond that is going out, everything beneath that is going in. So let's start to manipulate the image. And we have these adjustment layers in here, and one that we are going to be using the most is this brightness contrast, this levels, and these curves. So let's go to brightness and contrast and add a little bit of contrast into this to separate the values even more. And let's copy the value again. And now there are a lot of separations in here. You see these parts are out, going in, and these parts are coming out. And if we look at that, we're getting this. So I'm not going to make it too noisy. Let's delete this. And this is a good starting point. And now let's go to levels and start to add a little bit of more separation into the values. And this is only going to be a starting point. And later on in ZBrush, we try to add on that even more. So let's say that we are happy with this. This would make a great tiling map. And now we are gonna merge them together. And now we're going to export this and tile on that mesh. But the problem is that this isn't tiling. If we, for example, let's repeat the image over and over, it isn't tiling. And the separation is so obvious. But we are going to make that tile. And how we do that, we go to filter, other, and offset. And this offsets the image based on the pixel data that we give it. And now the image size is 4K. As you know, we're going to put 2048 and 2048 in here. And now these are the edges of the image which have been offsetted into the center. And we're going to take this healing brush and start to paint on these areas so that it tries to blur out the edges. So let's pick something bigger and start to cloud this area and wait a bit for the calculations to be done. And now you see that harsh seam is gone. And this is what you can do to make the image tiling. And it broken that tile as well. So this one. And of course, the sky is the limit on how far you can go, but this is going to be a tiling detail image. We're not going to put a lot of time and effort on this. We're gonna make it tile, and this is going to act as a base layer for us. And later on in Photoshop, in ZBrush, we try to add a lot of sculpting on top of it. So now we're going to export this, and I'm going to export it as a PSD, which you can see here. Because PSD and TIFF are the best cases for these maps that we import into ZBrush for detailing. So in ZBrush, to add the displacement map, we need to come in here in this displacement tab and import the map. And this is what we created, and let's import it. And now what we are going to do is drag this intensity up just a bit and hit apply displacement. And it has added too much displacement, and this is not what we want really. We want to make the effect a lot more subtle. So let's make the effect a little bit less strong. And this is still too noisy. Let's make it something like this, and this is going to be a good starting point for our project. So this is the first layer. We're going to add just a little bit of noise, not too much. So let's make it a bit stronger. Not that much. Put something in between. I think 2 will work. Okay, this is good for the base. And now we're going to create another displacement map. And it's this, it has good amount of directionality to it. So let's see what the resolution is. I feel like if I scale it to 496, by 248, we're getting something good, and we do not need to crop it. So again, let's bring the saturation down and start to add a bit of contrast into this to make it pop up a bit more. So something like this, and it has a little bit of directionality that we really love. So let's go to filter, offset, let's go to filter, offset, and now on this we are going to offset it to 2048 by 1024, because this is 2K by 4K image and that value will work. So let's try to blur the edges out to make it tiling in all directions. And now this is only left. Okay, and if you want to make it a little bit more consistent, you can blur these out as well. So for this, I'm going to use the healing brush tool, and it wants you to hold down the alt click and sample from an area, and then using that, try to paint on these to blur that area out. Okay, this will do. And now let's hit the offset to take it back to its original place and save it as PSD. Okay, and now let's go to ZBrush and start to replace the map. Bring it in, and now let's apply the displacement. And you see a good amount of directionality that this one has added. So let's go back some steps before adding that map. So let's bring this map without even doing the previous map, and now apply the displacement, and now you see it has added a lot of good directionality for us in terms of wood fibers and things like that. It's a great effect and I'm loving it. So let's make it a bit stronger. Apply the displacement, and this will do, but it's overall a little bit too noisy. We have a lot of contrast in here which we don't want. So let's make it 3 instead of 5, and this will do. And this is a great base to start with. I'm happy with this, and I'm going to now start sculpting on the edges to add bevel, natural bevel on the edges, because if we try to see this, you see this is a flat card, and if I try to add a little bit bevel, for example something like this, if you try to add bevel, you see the detail that is taking place in here. And the same goes for the gameplay. If we start to hit the edges, it's going to be a lot more prominent when we start to place this into the scene. So take a backup from your scene so that we're going to sculpt. And one way of using alphas again is to use alphas that are not tiling. For example, in these images in here, you see we can grab this information, these wood fibers from these images, and start to turn them into grayscale maps to start sculpting using these inside ZBrush, and they will make perfect things because we have derived these from real images, and they have a lot of good naturality to them that we can use. So to make that again, let's go in here and try to crop the image to parts that are most likely to be used. So this part is the most interesting in this. First we need to disable the ratio and then try to grab from it. First, clear the ratio. And then try to pick up freely from this. And this part is the part that is holding the most information that we want. So first, turn it into grayscale, and then start to add a little bit of contrast into this to separate it even more. And as you know, these black parts are going in and these white parts are going to stay on top. So save this as a PSD. And this one will make a perfect alpha. I'm going to use this as the way it is. I'm only going to turn it black and white. And then let's go to levels to see what we can grab from this. Trying to erase a lot of this information to keep only this area. So something like this will be perfect. Or even we can bring a lot of more information into this. And let's see, adding a layer of contrast does do this. Okay, and this is going to be fine. I'm going to save this also. And this one, in this, I'm going to only keep this part that has the most interesting information in it. And let's remove that part. And again, convert this into grayscale mask. And I feel like overall this is going to be perfect. And I'm not going to do anything with it. So I'm going to save it as a PSD. And when you're trying to import height maps like this into ZBrush, try to export them as PSD or TIFF because they are a lot more better in quality terms than other formats. So this one, let's see what we can take from this. This is good, but let's see what it does as inverted. This is going to be a good selection mask for Substance Painter when we try to texture things in there, but I'm going to overall keep this. Let's bring the contrast down and repeat the process sometime to bring the contrast down a bit. So again, let's add the levels. To bring the white values down a bit. So this one will do a lot better compared to that. Just a bit of contrast or contrast removal. And save this as a PSD again. So we're going to use these and import them into ZBrush to start giving details into our mesh. So let's grab a brush from here. You can always use a standard or clay, which one that you like, it's up to you. And then for importing that, you need to go into alpha and import. And from here, you can select from the PSD files that we created before and import them as alpha. And now we have them in here, but this is based on the session, and if you start to restart ZBrush, I believe these are going to be gone. So to be able to drag those alphas in here, we need to go into this brush mode and make it drag rectangle so that we are not painting, we are dragging alpha out. So we need to have backface mask on and try to select one of these alphas. For example, this. So let's start to drag to see what happens. And if you want to modify this more, you can go in this modify tab and start to do all sorts of modifications. For example, adding a contrast, bringing intensity down, or even using this streak length, you're going to make that bigger, something like this. And right now, I feel like it's overall too noisy, and I'm going to bring the intensity down to something like 10, and I believe 10 is going to be noisy as well. So let's make it half. And it's overall too noisy, so I'm not going to use alphas. But if you are going to create alphas, this is the way to go about it. So now that I have given these a little bit of primitive noise, we can safely go and start to hit the Dynamesh. And this Dynamesh will ruin the UVs, but I really don't care for now because we're going to be doing a lot of changes to these which will ruin the UV as well. So we're going to use the Dynamesh and modify the UV so that the UV distribution, the polygon distribution is unique overall. So let's go and try to Dynamesh this. I'm going to set the resolution to 256 to see what happens and hit Dynamesh, and it's going to remove the subdivision levels, so hit yes. And now it has Dynamesh this back to someplace. You can either keep this as an overall noise and start to sculpt on it, or you can Dynamesh using a bigger value, for example something like 1024 and Dynamesh. It's giving me the same result, so I'm going to start with 128, hit Dynamesh, and it removes the subdivision levels that we had in here. And it's a good idea to start with a lower resolution because now adding bigger details is easier than starting to have a lot of polygons, for example, million polygons on these. And always try to start with lower polygons because it's more manageable and you can do a lot of things with it. So let's see what these alphas do. Let's bring the intensity up to something like 25. And this is a good starting noise, but it's overall too strong and too noisy. So let's delete by Control Z and bring this down because it makes the effect a bit strong. And now I'm holding Alt to make the effect negative. And you can do that as well. So now I'm understanding that these alphas are not going to be good for this case. So I'm going to start sculpting manually. We have added the primitive noises and everything is ready for a good sculpt. And now I'm going to detach these from each other because if I try to sculpt on this part, for example, I'm going to take a lot of things on this. So I do not want that. Let's take this and you can go into this split and hit split to parts. It's going to split all of the parts that are not connected to each other and split them basically. So we're getting individual planks, and now what you're going to do is holding shift on this, holding shift click on this to only be able to sculpt on this particular plank. And if you want to go to other planks as well, you basically select them, open this eye icon, and then start to sculpt on them. So for sculpting, I'm going to use this trim smooth border, which is a pretty good brush for hitting these edges. And to bring this trim smooth border, you need to go into Lightbox and into Brushes palette, and in here you want to go to this trim section, and this is a trim smooth border because it's not by default in the UI. You have to drag it from here, and then what you can do is grabbing that by going into this preference config, enable customization, and drag it into the viewport so that you are seeing this every time you open ZBrush. So the next brush that I'm going to be regularly using is this dam stand brush, which is default in the UI. So you hit B and D, and here it is, dam stand brush. This dam stand brush is what we're going to use for creating wood fibers and things like that. So the two brushes that I'm going to be regularly using are these brushes. So let's start sculpting. And the most obvious thing that we're going to do for starters, we're going to hit the edges to make them look broken or something wood-like. And one more thing that you can do to make this trim smooth border a bit more stronger is selecting an alpha and bring this alpha, this square alpha in here. And this makes the brush effect a lot stronger than what it was before. So compare this to that. You see now the chippiness that we add in here is a lot more stronger and more like wood. So we're going to add some edge noise onto these. And one mistake that a lot of people do is adding a lot of noise to edges. We don't want that. We only want to add some damaged edges. For example, if you try to sculpt every edge uniformly, you're going to get a lot of noise. For example, something like this is going to be a lot of noise, and you're not going to distinguish between that, and there's no resting for eyes. So try to add edge damages selectively. Try to add damages to the parts and leave some parts undamaged so that the viewer has some resting places and the sculpt that you make is not pure noise. And I'm going to make these two-sided. I'm going to make unique sculpts on every side so that when we rotate these, we are getting perfect results every time. And this helps with the reusability later on when we try to make the dock using this kit. This limited amount of planks is going to make a whole dock, and you will see that later on. Using the power of Unreal Engine and Nanite and ZBrush and Blender, we're going to create a dock using only these parts. So let's hit the edges, and these wood fibers are already contributing to the sculpt a lot and making this wood-like. And when I'm sculpting, I always try to sculpt on a lower poly count, something like this, and then I start to add the finer details later on. When I try to add finer details, I will make this a lot more high polygon. So hit more edges, and leave some edges untouched, something like this. So let's say that we are happy with this, but before that, let's give these edges some bevel. And if you are familiar with the bevel and how it looks, this is going to be a great natural bevel that we add. And now let's say that we are happy with this and the result that it has given us. You have a couple of ways to introduce a lot more polygons into this, because we have now started to add a lot of waviness into this polygon distribution, which we don't want. One way of doing that is going in here and start to, for example, double the resolution, bring the blur down, because if you blur it, it's going to blur a lot of the things that you have sculpted in here, and hit Dynamesh. So that didn't work. Let's bring the resolution up and Dynamesh. So it didn't either. And this Dynamesh is based on the size of the model. If you remember, we told in the beginning sessions, is dependent on the size of the model. So we have to bring it all the way to 496. And it didn't even help. Let's go for Dynamesh Master. Dynamesh Utility. It was Dynamesh Master before, but now it's Dynamesh Utility. So let's bring the polygon to something like 1,000,000. And good thing about this is that you can input the number in here to tell ZBrush how many polygons you really want from this, how many actual polygons. So let's hit Dynamesh and bring the blur down. And this is not helping either because this mesh is too small. So yeah, it's not working. So we have to stick with adding a smoothness ourselves. So I disable this as smooth and start to divide this. So now we have a lot more resolution to work with. Something like this is good for this case. And now I'm adding damp standard. And by using this damp standard, you're ready to add a lot of wood fibers in here. And you see how many details it starts to add. Make the brush size smaller and start to add some overall noise, and then grab the trim smooth border and start to selectively sculpt on these to remove some of that to create something wood-like. And as I said, we really do not want a lot of noise all over the place. So this is the process that we're going to continue, but before that, I'm going to do the same process for all of these. I'm going to sculpt the edges first, and then we will start to give resolution to these, and then later on we start to add those finer details. So for now, it's all about the edge treatment. So let's hit edges. And try to look here and there and start to inspect your object from all sides. And never start to make your sculpt too noisy, because later on when we make the normal map, it's going to be too noisy, and we are really not a fan of making things too noisy because the eye really doesn't know where to look at. And you need to have some resting places for the eyes and some areas that are untouched, because if you make it too noisy, it's pure noise and chaos and bad for composition. And you see how perfect this adds damage to the edges. And this edge treatment is one of the most important parts in ZBrush whenever you try to do things. And even for hard surface things, I start to add a lot of damage into the edges because I really like things when they are broken. And it's a lot more challenging than normal sculpts. And you can start to add layers as well. So let's inspect this, and here is untouched a bit. Let's add a bit of a sculpt into this. So this is good. And one thing that you can do is selecting your surface and start to add details by not picking up your brush. And when you are doing something like this, it's going to pick the normals from the place that you sculpt, and then you continue. And the point in this way is that you shouldn't pick up the pen. You should start the same stroke and never pick it up, because every time you try to pick your pen, it's going to sample from normals of your surface, and that is really what making it look like wood. And never try to add distinguishable piece in your object. For example, we really do not want something like this all around our mesh, and when we try to add this into the scene and try to repeat this, we are always seeing something like this. Always be as generic as possible when starting to creating kits. And let's say, for example, we want to add a little bit of waviness into this. We go in here and hit B, M, and V, and it's going to drag the move brush for us. And this move brush, I'm going to make it a little bit stronger and try to add a bit of waviness into the wood. And this makes a perfect wood plank for us. And I start to inspect it from all sides, and I start to displace it just a bit so that it's not pure CG line. And I'm always trying to break that CG line because it really ruins the effect of realness in that. So let's see this, and I'm going to try to sculpt on this. And you see, if I now try to dynamesh this with 496, I got a lot more resolution because this mesh is a lot more bigger than those meshes. So let's go back and start to make this a little bit displaced. And don't go too overboard with this. We won't only want just a bit of waviness in here. So that it's not perfect CG lines, and always try to break these straight lines when you see them in games. You want some natural waviness when it comes to lines in your game, because these lines are not always in life going to be perfect CG, and especially for these man-made things which have a lot of waviness and natural things into them. So let's start to hit its edges, and later on when we try to import this into Unreal, I'm going to make this nanite meshes and not try to remove a lot of polygons from this. And then later on we're going to UV them into Blender, inside Blender, and then texture them inside Substance. And this Substance is great when it comes to texturing assets and props for nanite, and it makes them really a pleasing thing to do. And the texturing is going to be a perfect thing using smart materials and things like that. And we'll learn how to do smart materials and how to reuse as much data as we have. So let's try to sculpt. And hit these edges as well. So and when we done with treating these edges, I'm going to add some finer details in here, some wood fibers and things like that. So for now, let's treat the edges and sometimes go crazy with it and start to add some crazy details in here, but be cautious not to go overboard with it and start to add a lot of noise. So let's go for the next one, which is here. So as I'm looking at this, I first want to add a little bit of noise using the move brush, just a tiny bit, and not making it too strong. And try to have a look at your reference board to see if you can grab an idea from that or not. And by hitting these edges, we are making them a lot more beautiful when we start to import this into Engine, because these lines are not going to be seen in the game very good, because we need to add some bevels in them, something like this. This is a natural bevel, and this makes it visible in the game when we try to add it and texture it. And as I said, add some details that are big, then some details that are medium, and details that are small. And never try to make your noises the same size always, because it's going to be unidentifiable for the viewer when they try to look at them. And this place is untouched a bit. So this is good. Let's see how many L's we have left. Just some of them. So let's select this and start to detail this one as well. So I'm going to left this like this and not add too many noise into this. I'm going to make this perfect straight. Just adding some wood damages here and there. So this is good for here. And let's go add the details in here. And as I said, never make your noises and the details that you make in the same size. You want to add big, medium, and a small details. Some details that are visible from far away, for example, from this view, you are seeing some of these noises, but when we get close to them, you are seeing those finer noises in here as well. So make the noises in 3 categories: big, medium, and a small. And this big, medium, and a small goes about everything you try to make in CG. And this is a rule that we follow in every content creation that we make, no matter how game it is, games, animations, composition, lighting, anything that you do, this big, medium, and a small is going to help us a lot. So this is good. And let's go for this. And start to make the edges more visible. And the next kit that we're going to be sculpting is those broken kits, broken plank kits. And there we're going to also chip away from parts, delete some parts to make it more interesting and old looking. And as I said, go with big, medium, and small details. And these big, medium, and small details were prominent when we were blocking out the environment. And when we were blocking out the environment, we were creating big shapes, shapes that are visible from so far away, and try to make them as cohesive as possible to see if the composition is working or not. And when we were happy with the big shapes, we started to bring the medium shapes in. For example, creating the dock railing system, creating things like that. And when we were happy, we go another layer up and make the small things, tiny things. For example, adding set dressing props and things like that. And always try to make big, medium, and a small a thing to consider. So add a bit of waviness into this and start to chip the edges even more. So this trim smooth border is very great brush when it comes to sculpting in ZBrush. And I find myself 90% of the time only using this brush creating a lot of things. And it's a great brush and a great feature to use. So this is a plank that is relatively new, and we're not going to add a lot of things into this. And later on, when we try to UV these, because there's no harsh seam visible in here, we have a great time UVing this because we really do not want to be selective about the edges the way we were in previous generations, selecting these sharp edges so perfectly and waste a lot of time on them. We're going to be a lot happier when we start to UV these nanite meshes. Of course, because they are a bit heavier on polygon size, we're going to have a little bit of harder time when it comes to waiting for UVing, but overall the process is going to be a lot more enjoyable. So again, let's start to hit these edges and try to add some details on them. And as I said, not try to sculpt everything that you see in here because it's going to make it pure noise and really bad for composition. And when we try to create normal map for these, we're going to have a hard time really distinguishing what is what because it adds a lot of noise to the composition. And leave some edges untouched like this. Okay, I believe we have done the whole thing. Okay, I'm happy with this. And let's visualize the whole kit together. And we have done creating the whole kit and adding those details that we wanted. So one thing we can do is starting to detail these more or going for these also and try to add noises in there as well. So I believe I should go and detail these out instead. And that is because there are a lot of times when I start to do a sculpting on something, go from big, medium, and small and tiny, and when I look at other places, I see that they're not even sculpted halfway. So I always try to go and sculpt at the same time because let's say that, for example, we add a lot of noise into this and come back to see that we haven't done anything in here and we have spent a couple of hours only adding details into this. And really that is an anticlimactic thing for me to really see that I have wasted a lot of time on something and left a lot of things as well untouched. So let's select this kit and shift click on here to make this visible only. So I'm going to add Shift D Shift D again and go into this displacement tab, and let's see if we can grab this, or let's see this. This is a non-tiling thing, but we're going to see what it does. Try to add so small of a noise, and this is already adding a good amount of noise onto these, and I'm really happy with how the texture is looking already, and I feel like it's overall a good thing to invest in it and making this one tiling. Let's see what the name is. I'm really loving this, and I'm going to make this a tiling one in ZBrush, in Photoshop, excuse me. So in Photoshop, let's add a backup from this and make it tiling. And let's see what the resolution is. I'm going to make it 496 by 248. So let's go with this. I keep the same proportions and I'm not doing anything with it. And let's see the dimensions. Keep these in mind because we're trying to offset it and make it tiling. So let's go to offset, filter offset. This is the value for that, and this is that. So let's pick up the healing brush, spot healing brush tool, and I start to blur the edges to make it tile. We're only adding just a bit of blur to make these harsh seams go away, because the woods happen to have a lot of harsh things in them, but we're adding just a bit of fine noise to make them better and to make sculpting a bit better on those. So let's try to blur this line as well. Okay, I'm happy with this. And let's save that and bring it into ZBrush. So let's go a step back, and in this alpha menu, import that tiling that we created. It's this one. So let's select it, tiling, and now let's apply the displacement, and some of those noises are gone. And it's overall starting to look good. Let's see what we can do about the tiling. About the intensity, let's make it double the intensity. And it's now a bit too noisy. Let's go with the previous one. This is better. Let's go with 1 and apply displacement. Okay, let's go with this. And because we added those noises and it has really done a lot of damage to the polygon distribution, I'm going to bring it into Dynamesh. Let's bring it up, and because the mesh is big now, this is a big mesh compared to being only one part. It's a whole mesh and it's a big one. So it's going to give us the resolution that we need. So let's go for 1024 bring the blur up and hit Dynamesh. Yes. And now let's see the result. We need to double the resolution, make it 2048 and hit yes again. So I'm going to keep this for now because Dynamesh isn't working for these parts. And go to a split and a split two parts. And now we're going to be a bit stronger on sculpting these. And we're going to damage them more because this is the broken wood kit, and we're going to damage it a lot more and being a lot more harsher when it comes to sculpting these. And one thing that you can do is go to P and select this one of these lasso brushes. You can select T, and from trim brushes, not lasso, I mean trim. You can select trim, for example, trim lasso, and it tells that we need to hit Control and Shift to activate that. So we activate it and let's see what it does. You try to select an area and it's going to delete the rest. So it's good for chipping from the woods that we have in here. So let's go and using this lasso brush start to chip away some areas. Something like this, but we really do not want to be so aggressive with it. We only want some overall noise. So let's see what we have selected in here. Hold down Shift and only select this. So again, grab the trim smooth border and start to add details to these parts. And because the noise is too strong on here, I'm going to also chip away some of the noise that is present on the surface. And give this area a bit of detail to make it not so CG. It looks like Dynamesh isn't working on this, so there's not a problem. We stick to the default subdividing system instead of using those to add detail. So let's give detail to edges as well. And if you want to use Dynamesh, let's bring the blur down, make it all the way to the end, and it has done a great job of making the polygons more uniform. You see the effect that is happening in here, and this is the result of that trim lasso that we dragged. You hit Control and W to make it united all over the place. It's nothing, it's a polygroup that it created for us, and you can simply remove that using that method. So I feel like adding Dynamesh has already removed some of that strong noise that we had there, and we're ready to go to the next one. And also you can go to B, M, and V and try to make it a bit more like wood plank and give it a bit of detail in the shape. And in areas like this, if you see a lot of polygons being displaced badly, you simply hold down Shift and drag on it to make it better. And for example, this area you see in here, but later on we will fix them. And I'm seeing that this line is so uniform. Let's use the move brush and I start to displace it a bit. Okay, let's go to the next plank. This is from the previous kit. Let's go for broken ones. And this is it. First, let's add a Dynamesh already on the highest quality. Bring the blur down. It removes some of those noises and makes the polygon distribution a lot more better. Add noise. And start to hit the edges. And one more way of removing geometry is by masking parts. So let's go to the masking, and you can mask a part, or you can paint mask, whatever you want to do. And also there are options for this masking as well. For example, we can use the curve, lasso, or anything. So let's, by holding down Control, let's select the mask, and into the masking brush, let's go for lasso. And let's select a part using this method. Let's make the angle a bit sharper, and we have selected from the both parts. So we have now selected the mask, and we're going to use this to delete the geometry. So let's go in here and sharpen the mask so it selects the sharp line. And now in here you want to go to this visibility tab in here and hide unmasked. And this is done the reverse, so let's mask this part and hide unmasked. And now that we have removed that part, we can go into geometry, and into this modified topology, you see here it's written delete hidden. So hit delete hidden, and now it has removed that part for us, and we have an open gap in here. You can simply solve the open gap by dynameshing it. So we have the dynamesh activate, hold down Control and drag, and now it has capped the thing for us. And that is as easy as it could be. So we can use these regularly in our workflow, so let's drag them into the viewport. Let's go to Preferences and Enable Customization, and this we can drag it in here, and this delete hidden also we can drag it here, because I've found that they are a lot more useful to our workflow. So let's hit Dynamesh again to cap that, and if you want to make it a single polygroup, you only need to hit Control and W, and now the polygroup has been united. And in this part we simply smooth it a bit to make the polygons more united. And you can also drag the Dynamesh again to make it better. So let's again, using the masking, take from this part sharpen, unhide the mask, reverse the mask, hide on mask and delete, and now cap it. And now Dynamesh again to make the polygons better. So this is one way of going about it when it comes to removing geometry. And now we have modified this too much. Let's go and trim the edges. And as for edge trimming, I'm going to be a lot more radical on this because, as you remember, this is the broken plank kit that needs a lot more refinement than the previous one. So let's make the noises a bit more weaker. And you can do something like this as well, creating a lot of flat planes on the woods. And later on, when we try to add finer details, we will trim these a lot more. Okay, let's go for the next subtool, which is this one. So for this PMV, so add the move brush and displace it just a bit. And again, go for trim smooth border. And start to trim the edges and the surface as well. And you can Dynamesh it to get something, but in this case I really do not need to Dynamesh it because it's already doing a good job in adding those details. And I believe that there are some kits remaining and we're gonna fix them just using the same method. And let's see if I can remove something from this. Sharpen, and let's see, remove from these in here as well. So let's not take from this part, reverse the mask, Dynamesh. Bring the Dynamesh resolution up to fill this gap in here for us. And now it's so CG perfect, we need to add some details to it. But first we can take some from here and from here as well. So first we need to sharpen the mask, reverse it, remove, delete hidden, and Dynamesh. And we need to treat these edges as well. So let's go about it. And this is something that you really don't want in your game. Some edges that are so sharp that break the immersion of these being man-made. And I always try to add a lot of broken stuff to my sculpting and things. And even if I'm going to create an archivist scene, I really try to make it broken and dirty. I really hate scenes that are clean and untouched. So Dynamesh again. And this is good. And we have some more planks left. So let's take from it, sharpen, remove the mask, hide point, delete hidden, and Dynamesh. Of course, we need to bring the resolution all the way up so that it gives us the best possible results. Okay, and now let's hit the edges. And of course, there are some brushes more which you can use to flatten things out. For example, like the flatten brush, which you can grab from here, hit F, and this flatten, but it makes the whole thing washed out so much. And it corrupts the geometry as well in some places if you're not so careful with it. So I'm not using this in this case. It has its own use cases, but this is not one of them. So hit the edges. And because this belongs to the broken kit, I'm going to be a lot more radical in sculpting high frequency details on this. For example, things like this, which I'm not normally sculpting on newer kits. And the good thing about this approach is that we create the kit, and as long as it goes in case of creating kit, we are creating the kit that holds the most essential things to creating the dog. We are creating basic things, and then later on, with that mentality that I told you, the blacksmith mentality, we start to place them together to create a lot of new identities. And even with this single kit alone, we can create a lot of things. So Dynamesh, and here is so CG. Let's trim it. This trim smooth border is a bless really in sculpting details. And you see, only using this trim smooth border we have came so far in adding details into these planks. And even in the parts when we start to sculpt rocks, we take advantage of this trim smooth border as well. So let's go for the next one, and let's compare them size by size. This one is a bit smaller, so I really do not need this. Let's delete it. Delete. I'm going to keep this. Delete this. I'm going to only sculpt these two. So we have these two remaining. Only two, okay. Well, let's go for this and start to chip away from it. I'm only going a lot more radical on this one. Delete hidden, Dynamesh resolution up, blur down, and hit Dynamesh. So we need to treat the edges. And I'm going to be a lot more aggressive on these edges because these are looking too CG and I'm really not liking the way they look. And I'm going to sculpt a lot of detail in here. So let's hit the edges. And for now, I believe after sculpting this and the next one, we are ready to detail these out. So we have created the big shapes and medium shapes on this plank kit. And then what we remain with is the bark. And for barks also we're going to create some tiling alphas as well as paint alphas to add detail, those primitive detailing into these. And also we are going to add a lot of noise and waviness to them in terms of sculpting. So let's see what we happen to create with those. So always adding Dynamesh will make the topology a lot more uniform and united. Adding some surface treatments, making this less stronger. And this one, which I'm not using as well, because we have enough broken kits. So let's bring everything up. And now we are looking at these. We have created the healthy plank kit and the broken plank kit as well. So I believe this session is coming to its end. And in the next session, we're going to create either these ones and start to introduce big medium details on these two kits as well, and then leave another session for adding finer details into them, or I go and sculpt these and add those finer details and finish these and then go for these. But I feel like going for these and adding those details would be better, because as I told you, going step by step and bringing them all of them in the same level is a must. So see you in the next session.